Hello and welcome to Psyched, the show where we explore psychedelics through social, economic, and political perspectives.
All right, let's introduce our next speaker, Jasmine Virdi. She'll be talking about psychedelics, ecology, and biospheric interconnectedness. Jasmine is an experienced freelance writer, editor, and proofreader. For the past 2 years, she has been working for the fiercely independent publishing company, Synergetic Press, where her passions for ecology, ethnobotany, and psychoactive substances converge. She is passionate about the healing potentials of psychoactive plants and substances, as well as their capacity to help us connect with the natural world around us. Her goal as a writer advocating for psychoactive substances is to raise awareness of the socio-historical and cultural contexts in which these substances emerged in order to help integrate them into our modern day lives in a safe, grounded, and meaningful way. Jasmine, thank you so much for joining us. Really excited to be hosting you today.
Hi, yeah, thanks Marique. Thanks for the wonderful introduction. I'm so psyched to be here. Marique has already told me a little bit about you, but I would like to add that I have been in the psychedelic space, I guess at least culturally, for the past 5-6 years or so, and only been working in the space for about 2.5 years. And I'm really passionate about ecology. I think stumbling into Synergetic Press and my work there, I found a place finally where I could merge my love for language and psychedelics with ecology. And I think that spreading these kind of ideas in this day and age is so vitally important, because we're at such a critical point in our development as a society. So I'm going to be sharing my screen with you. I have some slides, so let's see how this goes. Okay, so here we go. Oops. So psychedelics, ecology, and interconnectedness. In this talk, I would like to look into the current ecological crisis that we are facing, and also the crisis in mental health, looking at in the aspects in which these things are almost the same, in which they are reflections of each other, and I guess looking at the ways in which psychedelics can foster an experience of interconnectedness. So delving more deeply into this, we are facing an unprecedented ecological emergency. I think that the current situation with coronavirus is just adding to this in the sense that it is highlighting our political, social, economic, and healthcare systems that don't serve us anymore. Our ways of life have become fundamentally disembodied. We are so becoming a part of the technosphere that we are leaving behind our bodies to an extent. So I think that we are becoming disembodied to our own disadvantage. And to a degree, we have been collectively in denial of the interconnected, intricate, and interdependent web of life. The biosphere is an integral system. It is a whole, and living, I guess, well, it's kind of a contradiction, but in the sense, but living individualistically, we are denigrating the biosphere. And so I also want to draw attention to the fact that this crisis, and any crisis, is an opportunity for change. It's an opportunity to reach towards something greater. And there's this wonderful quote from my favorite Jungian psychologist, Jean Shinoda Bolen. If you come into the world in a time of crisis, the opportunities and responsibilities are much greater. So I think to a large extent, all of us in the psychedelic community feel this pervasive crisis. We feel it, and we all want to stand up and take responsibility. I think that's what draws us to this community. And there is so much benefit when it comes to the healing capacities of psychedelics. So the ecological emergency is one side of a two-parted coin. I think it is also refracted in our mental health epidemic. So we are seeing depression, people suffering from depression, like rates are skyrocketing, and the same with suicide rates. So I think that it comes from a sense of social alienation and isolation, which coronavirus has also served to amplify this feeling of alienation that we have. It's an alienation from each other to an extent, and more fundamentally from nature. But I think that psychedelics offer such a vital part. Well, they are tremendously healing, and they are potentially one of the best pharmaceutical, I don't want to say pharmaceutical, but best mental health treatments we have at this point. But are we really curing people if we're sending them back to an environment which begets illness? So is it psychedelics that will heal us and send us back to sick environments, or do we need to take a more integral view of what's going on? And speaking of this sense of catastrophe and opportunity in the crisis, I am particularly drawn to the idea of liminal states and liminal spaces. And the idea of liminality, essentially it comes from the Latin word limen, which means threshold, and referring to the middle stage of a rite of passage. And to an extent, I genuinely feel we are collectively going through this rite of passage right now. Our identity is being dissolved in the present moment, and we are going into a period of unknown. But the unknown is so rich with potentiality, and it's rich in the fact that there is so much community building in that space. But I think it's of vital importance that we pay attention to the ideas that are being developed in this time, and the ideas that we are spreading with each other and embodying, because the ideas that come out of this time will go forward and restructure our society and restructure our new identity. So this ambiguity can be a playful thing. We're going into the womb collectively, and hopefully we emerge as more integral wholes. So exploring why we are facing this crisis, this mental health crisis, and this ecological crisis, I came across the concept of wetiko. And wetiko is a Native American concept. It comes from the Cree Indians of Canada, although different Native American groups have their own different terms for the concept. But essentially, it is used to refer to an evil spirit or a mind virus that dwells in the heart of human beings, or dwells in the mind of human beings, sorry. And so it possesses us and draws us to take greedy and selfish actions that are just not considerate of others and the biosphere at large. A fantastic writer, Paul Levy, wrote a book about this called The Spelling Wetiko, and he compares the idea of wetiko to the Jungian shadow, saying that it is a part of ourselves that we are blind to, we are in ignorance of, and so it's hard to notice what we do and notice that these ecocidal tendencies and self-destructive tendencies are enacting themselves through us. And part of the way of dispelling this mind virus, this malware of the mind, is to bring compassion to it and shine the lights of awareness on it. And I think that psychedelics play a critical role in shining awareness on different aspects of the self. I don't mean to say that there is an actual spirit dwelling in us that is impelling us to do these things, but in a metaphysical sense. And I genuinely feel that there is some force bringing us to enact these things. The shadow, the wetiko, we need to dispel it with our own self-possession, which is taking a step back and reclaiming our sovereignty. So exploring the concept of wetiko led me to the notion that the ecological crisis can be framed as a psycho-spiritual crisis. We are collectively undergoing a crisis of meaning, and a psycho-spiritual crisis in which we have lost contact with our values. And if you look at any wisdom tradition, they beg the questions: who are we? Where do we come from? What is our purpose here? And it is those questions that go on to shape a worldview and the structures that socio-economic institutions go on to take. So I love this quote here by Elias Amidon and Elizabeth Roberts: healing ourselves and working to resolve the contradictions in the human earth ecology is the same work. So part of healing ourselves on a mental health level involves reconstituting our relationship to the biosphere at large. So what is the role of psychedelics in the Anthropocene? In the age when we are driving the sixth mass extinction, why do we care so much about them? What is their utility? Well, I think that psychedelics are one of the most profoundly catalyzing agents for consciousness change. They have a rapid effect, and one of their core properties is their ability to facilitate direct experience. And so also many studies have looked at the brain functions under psychedelics, and they dampen the activity of the default mode network, which is responsible for this this voice that we have that kind of is our internal dialogue. And so this is quietened down in psychedelic experiences, and we are able to enter in a non-dual perception. The dampening of the DMN is associated with the experience of ego death or ego dissolution. And this non-dual perception allows us to realize that there is no environment. And that is a fallacy that our culture stands upon. We're taking for granted the external environment and treating as if it were outside of ourselves, because everything that we put into the biosphere, we put back into our own bodies. It goes back into our water, into our food, into our soil. And so I think psychedelics have a profound capacity to change that relationship. Also, Imperial College London have looked at the effects of psychedelics on the experience of nature connectedness, and psilocybin in particular increased experiences of participant nature connectedness and oneness. So also I would like to compare this to the overview effect, or the big picture effect, which is what astronauts reported when they went to the moon in 1972 on the Apollo 17 spacecraft. This picture is a famous one known as the Blue Marble, and astronauts reported transcendental experiences of unity looking back at the Earth from outer space. And some of them even said that going to the moon was not the most important part of going to space, but in fact, it was seeing the Earth from such a distance. And this experience of cosmological unity, of unity with this marvelous blue planet that we live on, and seeing it as a fragile, delicate ecosystem that should not be taken for granted. And I guess this can also be compared to the experience of samadhi, which is the state of oneness talked about in Hinduism, and also a state of oneness that can be compared to the state induced by psychedelics. However, I do want to say that psychedelics are not cures in and of themselves. Similar to going to the moon, psychedelics are the media which get us there, but they are not the message. And I love this quote by Ralph Metzner from one of our books published by Synergetic Press, Birth of a Psychedelic Culture, in which he says, "I believe that the important thing is not drugs per se, but the notion and practice of expanding consciousness and taking many more perspectives into account in all situations. The use of drugs is almost a red herring in that it focuses on a particular media, which becomes sensationalized." So I think within this movement, it's really key to not glorify the role of psychedelics or sensationalize them. Yes, they are valuable tools and catalysts for change, but they are not the only ones. And it is definitely us that need to take their message and do the work thereafter. So I don't know how much time I've got here, but I also don't want to paint a picture that the psychedelic movement and psychedelics in general are all sunshine and roses. This is a quote from Aldous Huxley, one of my favorite authors, the author of the dystopian novel Brave New World. The propagandists of the future will probably be chemists and physiologists as well as writers. And he was an early proponent of the idea that the propagandists of the future would create these wonder drugs that would make people happy. And so I'm weary of using psychedelics as a cure-all, end-all, you know, as an end in themselves. I think that they are the beginning of an awakening. They could be used for good or for bad, and so we need to avoid having another soma recreated. And Jung says here, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light. And I totally agree with this, in the sense that I think in this movement, it's so important to avoid, I guess, glossing over things and being blindly optimistic about things. I think we need to take everything with a pinch of salt and remain sober-minded. And I don't want to make anyone feel disillusioned or be negative in any sense, but I genuinely feel that if we are to make progress in this movement, we really need to tread with care and look at the negative aspects of this movement, and the areas that could be dangerous, and pharmacology and propaganda is one of them. And so what does a healthy future look like, and can we get there? I think that seeing psychedelics as tools for personal transformation is just one side of something much greater. Our personal transformation includes our transformation, well, the transformation of our attitudes towards nature and the natural world around us. To stay balanced in this movement, I really feel it's important to consult with our community elders and to learn from history, learn from the mistakes of our elders in this movement. And I think we can't take the approach of being ahistoric I think that we really need to cultivate a new embodied way of being, and the shift that we need to take is one in consciousness. We don't live in isolation, and personal healing also means healing our relationship with the earth, healing our relationship with the biosphere at large. And lastly, integrate, and then integrate some more. I recently wrote an article about integration for psychedelics today, and I am a really big advocate for integration and integration work in the psychedelic sphere. I think it's so critically important that we tap into the value and meaning that comes from these experiences, and dwell in that value and meaning and soak it in and make it our mission, as opposed to continually revisiting the state, which could be that continual revisiting. It could be driven towards a kind of hedonism, but I think that psychedelics are sacred tools and that they should be used as such. So I think that we really need to soak in the meaning of the lessons that they are teaching us. And I've included a lovely quote here from Ken Wilber. Although a person can have a peak experience of a higher dimension, the person's self still has to grow and develop and evolve in order to permanently accommodate those higher or deeper dimensions, in order to turn an altered state into a permanent trait. And I think, in effect, that's what we're trying to do. And for me, the permanent trait that I think that is so critically important is our worldview. We're trying to establish a more interconnected worldview in this community, because I think our species' survival depends upon it. And I do want to say that psychedelics aren't the only way of getting there, and I don't advocate that we should all go and take psychedelics. I think they're one tool for getting there, and there is just as much to be said for meditation and for making art and for reaching flow states. There are so many ways to go about reestablishing this interconnection, putting your hands in the earth and going out into nature. So psychedelics aren't the only way to get there, but I feel more important than the psychedelics is this notion of consciousness change and moving towards it. And yeah, that's all I have for you today. So I'm opening up here for questions.
As we wait for more Q&A to come in, I'll ask a couple. Jasmine, thanks so much for that. I really appreciated it. I'd love to kind of just pick off from that last slide of integration. I think we have a lot of different methodologies that are being developed in the research world for, how to integrate. What are some of the, I guess, like small moments that you see as being able to build ritual and habits that can actually help with integration? Something you just mentioned was, sticking your hands into the earth. What are some of those other small moments that can just like remind us of integrating the experiences of psychedelics, or just kind of these higher states of consciousness that we can experience with other practices?
Yeah, I think definitely after the initial experience, for me, it's really crucial to like pay tribute to that experience in some way, to write it down, to recollect it, to paint about it, to crystallize it in some way that it doesn't become a vague, dreamlike thing that happened to me in my mind. So to try and identify the core meanings of it. I think there is a lot to be said for mystery and silence, and maybe not putting it into language, not languaging it. But for me, the approach that works best is to go deeper into the meaning of it. But I think journaling, there's a lot to be said for journaling, and also going out into nature and communicating about it with people who are non-judgmental and who are experienced in a similar way. I think that can be a really healthy way to integrate your experiences. Community building, it's so important to feel like we are not alone.
Definitely. Yeah. And that was actually going to be the next question I wanted to ask is, you talk a lot about just kind of how do we step away from individualism, which in so many ways is destructive, and redirect ourselves more towards community. Oftentimes integration is seen more as kind of an individual type of practice where we're looking into ourselves. And there are, of course, integration circles, places that we can talk about these experiences. But how do we make even things like integration circles just significantly more about the community and individuals helping one another integrate as kind of a combined entity, instead of making it more about our own personal experience?
That's a really tough question. Yeah, I guess it depends on the community that you're in, because I think there are... Okay, so to rephrase your question to see if I understand it correctly, like how can we make integration, I guess, okay, maybe could you restate it?
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, like for instance, one of the things that like I found to be particularly useful for like my communities and some of the psychedelic retreats that I've run is basically seeing, how can you get a group of people together that are maybe from the same geographic region? How can you have them during the psychedelic experience be able to, for instance, like you said, paint together, sing together, etc. And then after that experience, can you actually have those individuals continue those very tangible acts of either singing or painting, etc. So I'm definitely aligned. And I was wondering, are there other ways that we can kind of create, community-based rituals around the process of integration, instead of ones that force us to, seek answers from just ourselves, instead of trying to better understand our interconnectedness and interpersonal dynamics with the people who surround us on a day-to-day basis. I know it's a lot, but yeah, that's that.
Yeah, I still feel that it's quite a tough question, because I guess, is there a way to do that at the moment without using our technology? Definitely, but I think it's more on the kind of grassroots level, like just from friend to friend, and then building something up from there. For me, what has really helped me with my own integration is I spent about a year living in Mexico, and I'm actually going to move there quite soon. And I regularly went to temazcal or sweat lodges with a community of friends, and we would do that once or twice a week. And just having a practice that was, I guess, communal and in reverence of the earth, in which we all kind of opened up, whether it was through song or whether it was through a few words, just kind of in the darkness expressing like, hi, my name is Jasmine and I'm experiencing this difficulty right now, and having others listen to you in that space of honesty, non-judgment, and I guess just openness is so healing. So I think just facilitating more truthful dialogue.
Definitely. Yeah, well, thank you so much, Jasmine. We really appreciated the talk. Be well, and we'll chat with you soon.
Okay, thanks.
Bye-bye.
For now.